Now, the New York Times is getting a little bit of pushback for its front page headline on an article about Donald Trump's response to the latest mass shootings in Dayton and El Paso. Now, the headline is, and you're going to love this, Trump urges unity versus racism. Trump, I mean, oh, no, he's urging unity in the country. I'm sorry, did the White House write that? That is awful. Seriously. Not even getting into the story. But the headline itself, awful. It's so bad that just about an hour later, they said, oh, crap, this is really horrible. Let's change that. And look, changing headlines, that's nothing new, right? Look, we, on YouTube, we mess around with our headlines all the time, right? Headlines of the videos. And the whole purpose, of course, is you want to get people that are curious, that are like, oh, I want to see what they're talking about, or, okay, this is interesting. I want to click on that. I want to read it, or I want to watch it, etc. So, look, I have experience with writing headlines, and I realize that it can be very difficult. And that is one of the excuses that the New York Times is going with. Oh, it's probably some low intern or somebody that's overworked and not reflective of the journalistic staff. And so they wrote this headline, and it's terrible, and we had to go and change it, whatever, right? But it was really, really bad and not reflective of the story at all. Not in a clickbait way, but in a, dear God, this is awful way. Now, the headline, and this is according to a spokesman for the Times, telling the Washington Post in an email, quote, the headline was bad and it had been changed for a second edition. Now, they did that. Later editions of the print paper feature the words, assailing hate, but not guns. Subheads above the two stories about Trump's speech were also changed. Now, assailing hate, but not guns, not the greatest headline, because it kind of omits, and again, it's really difficult to do that in a headline, I realize that, but it kind of leaves out the fact that the president regularly stokes hate. I'm just saying, not great. So, a lot of backlash, and this comes from a lot of journalists, not just readers, but again, journalists, people in the news, etc., that are coming after this headline. Let's start with Rolling Stone writer Jamil Smith, who said this, quote, "This is a Dewey defeats Truman of racism." A headline that is so bad and so inaccurate that they can make that comparison. Again, Dewey did not defeat Truman. But it was again, an incredibly wrong headline that they decided to go with that wasn't representative of all of reality. So, now, former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke is running as a candidate. I don't think he should. I think he should run against John Cornyn. He tweeted this, unbelievable. Fair enough. Senator Cory Booker also joined in, as well as Kirsten Gillibrand and Bill de Blasio. Booker said this, quote, "Lives literally depend on you doing better. Please do." All right, as Booker. Gillibrand says, "That's not what happened." And in a tweet tagging the Times official account, de Blasio wrote this, "Hey, what happened to the truth is worth it, not the truth, not worth it." So, a lot of political figures, journalists weighing in, and then, of course, you have Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, she said the front page should, quote, "serve as a reminder of how white supremacy is aided by and often relies upon the cowardice of mainstream institutions." Now, that is an incredibly good point, because she didn't just say, oh, it's bad, you need to do better. She's pointing out the context of why this is bad, why people are so angry about this. It's because, again, here you have a president that is a white, he calls himself a nationalist, right? For one, there's nothing wrong with being a nationalist. He's an old school racist, and he's, aids and abets white supremacy. Now he comes out and says, oh, no, I don't believe in white supremacy at all. It's a racism, it's a scourge, whatever. But those are the words, but that don't match his actions. So, and it also doesn't match his words previously. And so the New York Times goes, oh no, he assails hate, but not guns, and urges unity against the racism. No, he urges disunity and racism. And you've got to be honest about this. And this is the problem with the media, is they aid and abet white supremacy by still refusing, and in a lot of mainstream outlets, continue to refuse to call the president a racist, which he clearly is. Clearly. Now, other journalists also called the headline, quote, absurd, terrible. You even had TV critic Maureen Ryan tweeting this, quote, Palpatine urges unity against rebel scum. I like that for the Star Wars reference. But hey, that's also pretty accurate. Ed Carroll, writer for Gizmodo, said the headline might very well be taught in journalism class someday, but not for a good reason. So now why does all this matter, and what is it actually going to lead to? And that's the question, right? Well, there is a campaign on Twitter right now leading to a call to cancel subscriptions to the New York Times. Now here you have Adam Jennelson, right, who said, quote, I resisted for a long time, but I'm canceling my New York Times subscription today. Great reporters, but terrible editorial judgment on headlines and social media, which is all most people read. And that's true, and that's very sad, because, again, you don't get context from headlines, and I wish people read or into more than just the headlines, but unfortunately that's human nature. He continues, he said, it can't be the paper of record anymore if it doesn't accurately report the news. It doesn't matter that the underlying journalism is often very good, a point that I do give to him as well. Headlines matter more than ever. That's the reality of the industry. Refusing to take that seriously is the sign of a failing institution that is not up to the challenge. I'll spend my money on other outlets. Now, again, what he says about this being the reality of the industry, he is unfortunately incredibly 100% correct. That is the nature of the industry. Headlines do matter a lot. And again, I will give the context of saying that being in this industry, I know personally how difficult it is to write a good headline. Something that will interest people, something that will not be too clickbaity, something that explains what's going on, and all trying to fit it into, 10 words or less. And the less words that you can do, the better. Again, it brings me back to the Office, right? Where Kevin says, why say more words when, less words do good, or something like that, It's that. You try to put it in as few words as possible, but some things are very difficult to do. Some concepts are very difficult to do. So I completely understand how you can make a crap headline. But I don't think this is that situation. I think that this was, again, trying to defend Trump in a way to try to appear more neutral. And that's my big problem, right? So again, I'm a little mixed on this one, despite my criticisms, because, again, and this is the only saving grace here, is that the New York Times sometimes does excellent journalism. Excellent reporting, and deep dives into policy, and they've done some really great stories on Trump, but as well as other things. And so, there's that. But then again, on the other hand, you have op-eds that are absolutely terrible, and about terrible people, and even from terrible people. For example, David Brooks. Anytime David Brooks writes an article, the world cringes. Because it's often some sort of right-wing framed BS. That makes you cringe, like I said. And look, they're establishment media, so they have an establishment bias. And we all absolutely know that, right? But it's kind of worse than that. They not only have an establishment bias, but again, as I've reported on many instances, they have a tendency to punch left. They go after people like Bernie Sanders over and over again. They attack him, along with outlets like the Washington Post, which do 16 negative Bernie Sanders articles in 16 hours. And so, yeah, they do that while they give a pass to the far right. And let me give an example of that as well. Remember, they've gotten in trouble for giving glowing profiles to members of the alt-right. This example here is neo-Nazi member Tony Haveter, right? Now, in that piece, they wrote about his love of Seinfeld and favorite kitchen appliances and the fact that he was getting married. He was getting ready to get married. He's a neo-Nazi. Literally, the headline was "The Neo-Nazi Next Door." And that had an unfortunate effect of normalizing people with extreme views. And of course, after they read that, the backlash was immense. Immense. And again, they get in trouble. I don't know if it was the New York Times this time or if it was the Washington Post or another outlet, but they had talked about Richard Spencer being incredibly dapper, the dapper white supremacist. Now, there's nothing dapper about that. Oh, no, but he's different because he's well-dressed. And we must do a glowing profile about this rising star of the intellectual, not dark web, but the intellectual right. No, there's no intellectual right. Especially if it's just another name for white supremacy, right? And so this is the problem with the establishment media and the New York Times. They will not punch right. They only really want to punch left. So on the one hand, I guess, I totally understand wanting to cancel the subscription to the New York Times. Just for those reasons alone, that's enough. It's sort of like voting with your wallet, right? Not supporting this. At the other hand, right, there is that occasional journalism that's good. So I guess that's not really a good argument. That's not really a good defense for keeping your money going to the New York Times. Do they hold Trump accountable sometimes? Yes, they do. Do they have some good journalists and good writers? Absolutely. But overall, their establishment bias, again, helps the right wing and hurts the left and hurts progressives, which are a majority of the country. So if people abandon the New York Times and with their money, then what do you think is going to go first, though? Well, the investigative journalism, of course. That's the first thing they'll get rid of. And so that makes me, wary because, they're one of the few outlets now that actually can do, because it's incredibly prohibitively expensive, to do good investigative journalism, right? And so that leaves one less outlet that is able to do it, because, again, that's the first thing they'll eliminate, and then they'll be completely 100% useless. So it's an interesting question on, what you want to do. And the effect, of course, there are people out there saying, hold on, I know this is a terrible headline, but wait, think about the journalists that have their jobs and, that had nothing to do with these headlines, and they do good work. And so there's a lot of different things to think about whether you want to put your money in the New York Times. As it stands, look, not to be too shameless, right? But maybe people could get around that problem by putting more money into independent media, right? And so, and the reason that I say that, not just because I am independent media, which is why I called it shameless, but there are great independent media sources that would love investment so that they could create their own investigative journalism to do what the New York Times does, but do it better. And without that establishment bias, without all the trappings that come with being locked in that New York, Washington bubble. And so that's something to think about. And if that would be the trade-off, well, then I would be okay with the New York Times literally, dying, closing up shop, right? But that's just my opinion on the matter. But as it stands, the New York Times continues to get itself into trouble by not being objective. And that's my big issue here. They're not objective. Neutrality is not objectivity. Neutrality for the sake of neutrality, calling everything even, doing great glowing profiles on white supremacists while punching Bernie Sanders in the face, not literally, but figuratively in their articles. That's not objective. That is being neutral for neutral's sake and also showing your enormous bias. Now, I'm not saying every news outlet doesn't have some sort of perspective or bias, but at least we're honest about it. And then you call the New York Times establishment, like, oh, how dare you? We are not the establishment. We are a respected news outlet that is incredibly objective, but you only have to look at the reporting to realize that they're not. That they are neutral for neutral's sake. They don't even realize it. And so, I mean, there's that. And look, neutrality is not objectivity. Nazis are bad. Don't legitimize them. Donald Trump is a racist. And whether or not you think that you're actually doing that, or even if it's not your intent to say that, oh no, Nazis are not bad, or to normalize this stuff, that's what your final product ends up being. And if you were elevating white supremacists and while you're punching leftward, then maybe you need to re-examine what kind of outlet you really are. And maybe this, enough people will cancel their subs to make them think, wait a minute, maybe we need to take a good look at what we're doing, the kind of reporting that we're doing, the kind of people that we have on our editorial staff, et cetera, and maybe we can fix this. I hope, because again, we're not like the right wing. We want media to be better. We want the New York Times to actually be great. I want to be proud to have a subscription to the New York Times for their journalism and to bring that on the show and to share that with you guys. That's what I would love to be able to do. But right now, New York Times ain't doing it. And so maybe it is time to vote with your wallet. Maybe it is time to stop supporting these outlets that will ironically cape for white supremacy while saying that, oh no, democracy dies in darkness.